Welcome to the Ashes to Diamond podcast. And this week I'm excited to talk with Karen Dills, and she's a funeral coordinator with Dills Funeral Services, who are based in Auckland. Now, for Karen, the funeral industry has always been her calling, and she joined the industry in 2010 after returning to Auckland, having some time away. And Karen's path has brought her back to the team at Dills for a second time, and she finds it a privilege to be a part of a beloved one's journey and will always ensure that their story is heard and respected. Karen also holds a diploma in embalming and funeral directing. So Karen, welcome.
Thank you. Thank you. It's lovely to be here.
Well, it's a privilege to have you. It's really cool. So tell me a little bit about your background and how did you get into the funeral industry?
It's an interesting one. Even at school, I was fascinated by the industry for some reason. I didn't have any particular experience of death at that time. A friend, her father was an undertaker, as they were called back in the day.
Yes.
And I'm still often called an undertaker, which is fine. It's nice. I don't know, life just takes you on a journey, and I just remember thinking, wow, how fascinating that would be, not really having any real understanding of, funeral service or the industry at that time as a, 17-year-old. So when I finished school, I went and trained as a chef. So my background is hospitality and customer service. I've always been fascinated by people's stories. And so one day I was working and this lady walked in. She was a funeral director from Hamilton, and we got talking, and honestly, Cara, it was like someone flicked the light switch, and from there I spoke to a local funeral director, and I went and had the privilege to sit down and have a conversation just to see what was actually, involved.
Mm-hmm.
And had no idea what embalming entailed. If you asked my two sons, they would say that, Mum, you're squirmish. What do you mean? But all I can say is it's different, and I absolutely love both the embalming aspect and funeral service or funeral directing in the industry as part of my day-to-day role, and it's fascinating. So from there, it took probably about 6 months to get into the industry. I was in a place in my life and a time in my life where I felt that I could commit to funeral service. Timing is always really important in the big things in life that happen, sometimes when you least expect it.
Yes.
And so from really that day forward, I've never looked back, and I've had the privilege to be in the industry for 14 years now, and I love it as much as that first day.
Oh, that's cool. And the hospitality part, obviously how we associate with clients within the hospitality, that still actually dovetails across, doesn't it?
Absolutely. I think in funeral service and in the industry, it's never too late, and we all have life experience or skills, things that we can bring to funeral service as a career, and that transfer across into funeral service in the industry. It's great. It's nice.
And I also like that you said that everyone's got a story to tell, because that's something I believe as well. And sometimes people that you least expect have the most incredible stories, and it's quite a privilege, isn't it?
Oh, absolutely. It's a huge privilege to be a part of a family's journey. It's a snippet in their life story, and you're there to, be with them at that time for as long as it needs, and then they move forward into the next part of their journey. And the idea that, you can be a part of their story in that short space at a really challenging time in their life is huge. It's a huge privilege.
That's the word that came to my mind, actually, was privilege. So can you share a memorable experience where you felt you made a significant impact in helping someone cope with the loss of a loved one?
I think, oh goodness, there's always, one or two that, there's always stories that stand out. And so I feel that we had an experience where we looked after a little man, a child, and obviously very high grief, and the family were understandably devastated by the situation they found themselves in. And so it was about going at their pace and letting them know that everything that they were feeling was absolutely okay. that it was safe to express whatever they were feeling at that time. Is reassuring them as much as possible that you don't get closure, but you will find a way, navigate a way to move through this time. That when we have a loved one pass, they are always a part of a family story. That doesn't change, whether it's a little stillborn baby or whether it's a grandparent, regardless of age or circumstance. They are always a part of a family story, and that can never change. Because of the age, we just decided that as a team, and it is a team effort, I had a huge, fantastic team behind me to support me as well.
Okay.
And it meant that we made a plan to make coming to a funeral home not so scary for the younger family members. We wanted to make it as memorable as possible for the family and talked about creating experiences that when they looked back on this time, they knew that it may bring tears, but hopefully in time it would bring a smile. They knew that that's honoured and celebrated this little boy in a really, really special way. I think it's important to remember that it's not my grief, it's not my journey, it's a family's journey. And so I'm a mum, I'm a grandmother, and so obviously looking after a family with a young person always brings layers of grief and dynamics that no family ever wants to find themselves in that situation. And even as funeral directors and embalmers, so hence the privilege to, when we are called to be in that, support that family, that we do that with the utmost integrity and dignity and remember that it is their story, not ours. So just about creating a safe space for them to express everything they needed to at that time, and creating memories so when they looked back, they could help tell the other children in their family and future children that this was happening at this time for their family, and helping to a way of telling the story for the younger generation that wouldn't have been able to understand what was happening at the time. So yeah.
That's really special.
It's complex, but it's very, very special.
And like you keep saying, it's an absolute privilege to be able to help. Like it's really tragic and tough, and I get that, but it is a privilege to help people through their journey. Like you say, it's their story, and you're just helping guide them through. Because and you were probably similar. I can remember as a child, you were almost sheltered from it. If someone passed, when my growing up, we didn't go to funerals. That was only what the adults did. So things have changed.
Thankfully, they have. I think there's much more acceptance and encouragement to express. And a funeral is about acknowledging and celebrating a person, but also acknowledging that they have died. They haven't gone to sleep. They've passed. I think we need, as funeral professionals, we need to be very careful in our language and our terminology that we use, especially when we are talking to, it needs to be age appropriate, but when you're talking to especially parents, if they find themselves in that situation, making it their loved one has not gone to sleep, so that the children, when they go to sleep, they know that they are going to wake up in the morning. It's not going to be a scary experience. So we have a responsibility to be very careful around helping to create safe spaces to express.
Yeah, I actually really like that, because as you said that someone, they haven't gone to sleep, and I just suddenly thought, actually, that is a term that you so often would hear people say, about the cat or the dog or whatever it might have been. Oh no, they've gone to sleep. And then you're right, then that can bring through that fear, and young children especially, that nighttime or sleep time is a fear for something to be feared. Yeah, no, you're quite right. Yeah, thank you for that. It was just a term that was always used. So could you describe a situation then where you felt you went above and beyond your duties as a funeral director to provide comfort and support to a grieving family?
I feel that often we have a fantastic bereavement support group behind us that work with the families that we work with, and so their ongoing care doesn't end on the day of the funeral. It continues on. So I think that while it's not my personal area of expertise, it's about knowing that you can call upon people who are better suited and in a better position to understand larger aspects of the grief process, and just having a conversation with families, letting them know that we can put them in touch with people support people if needed, and sometimes that's sooner rather than later. Sometimes you're not ready to talk about anything, but then you do come across situations where it's quite evident that maybe the immediate family or spouse or whomever it may be is not coping as well. And so just being able to understand and read that situation as best as you can. And I think that's where just that ongoing level of care, you're not walking it for them, but you're just helping them make sure they have the best support possible to help them move forward.
I think, yeah, that's so true, because sometimes people will ask for help in the most subtle of ways.
Yes.
And
yeah.
unless you're tuned into that, you'll miss it.
Yes.
Yeah, that's really important. And I love the fact too that on your website you guys have a lot of services and things listed available, and little downloads and things that people can obviously do in their own time, which I think is really valuable.
Absolutely. And I think now more than ever, we're at a time where we have access to so much information, whether it be through the internet, through, talking with people. And as you say, Cara, it's different for everyone. And also, I firmly believe that, funerals give people a safe space to grieve. And so often you will see Rowan men and women who perhaps are attending a funeral of a friend or an acquaintance or whatever it may be, but sometimes that can actually bring up their own grief. To actually come or attend to a funeral for someone that you know, to actually walk through or drive through to a funeral home again where maybe you've been there a year ago for your own family bereavement or whatever it may be, it takes huge courage to drive, to walk through those doors again. But it's a safe space to express that grief. And I think that's one of the really important aspects of a funeral for the wider community, not just the family. And it actually allows a community to grieve in their own way, in their ongoing, the lives that we touch, the people's, as individuals, we all touch each people's hearts in some way, shape or form. And so it's that ripple effect of grief that it goes not only through the family, but to acquaintances and the community, the wider community. And so therefore, that ability to recognise that and have things in place for families and community to feel supported is really important.
Yeah, I understand that, because I was reading somewhere, and hopefully you can help me with this, Karen, that from my understanding, since COVID, a lot of people are now electing not to have services. Are you finding that, or have I just been misinformed?
No, I think, Cara, COVID, goodness me, that changed so many aspects of our lives, that on so many levels, that we're still finding out the ripple effect of living through COVID. I think it actually has brought to the fore the importance of, being able to grieve properly, because not only here in New Zealand, but of course, worldwide, families just weren't able to grieve, properly, let alone begin their grief journey through, having a funeral of a farewelling a loved one in a fitting way. All of that opportunity was taken away from them or delayed. And so I think the ongoing effects of that are still filtering through. The nice thing is that I think people are talking about it more. And so it's been our experience that we've had families who weren't able to hold a funeral service as they would have liked at that time. So they're actually planning memorial services now, years down the track, because they feel ready that they can. And I think it's a really lovely thing to do. However, it's making the most of, find themselves into actually make the most of celebrating that as best as they can.
You were saying that you're finding a lot more people now are starting to have memorial services. They feel it's time to recognise those loved ones.
Yeah, yes.
Okay, so how do you approach families, Karen, to personalise a funeral service that obviously reflects the life and personality of their loved one?
I feel when we first meet a family, and when I do, I like to, one of my favourite questions to ask, especially if it's a spouse that's passed, I will always ask, how did they meet? And sometimes I've had it on occasion where, especially if the grown children are present, then maybe they haven't actually heard the full story. It's quite neat to watch their faces light up and reminisce about how they did meet. And some of the stories they're absolute gems. I mean, just really, really gorgeous. And when you hear a family say that they've been married for 50, 60 odd years, and also the lifetime that they've lived through, especially people who are well into their 90s and even have lived past 100, when I think about or reflect on what they've actually lived through in the world and events and things like that, it's just incredible. It never ceases to amaze me. And so being privy to some of those stories is huge. And I think that that's really important that families and community hear those stories, especially when it's if someone has died of, maybe they've suffered from dementia or cognitive conditions that have robbed a family twice, and they lose a loved one to a medical condition such as Alzheimer's or dementia, and then they've lived with that for any period of time, and especially if it's been quite a long time, or they've just literally lost the function or the ability to communicate with their family and things like that. And then when they do pass, family are grieving again, because it can feel like a blessing, but it's still their mum, it's still their dad, it's still someone that they love. And so they grieve again. One of the most beautiful stories I think I've heard, and I think it reminds me, and I do share it from time to time, when it was a story of a granddaughter who basically had only ever known her grandmother was living with dementia. So this girl was probably, say, I don't know, 10, maybe no older than 13 sort of thing. And the family were talking about whether to have a funeral or not, and they decided they would. In the funeral, of course, the photo tribute showed these beautiful photos of this young woman that this girl knew as her grandmother, but of course she had no idea. She'd only ever known her grandmother as a grandmother who had lived with dementia, and so was obviously in care and things like that. Having the funeral and hearing the granddaughter hearing her grandmother's story from a young girl through to a grandmother, she actually mentioned to her family, I never knew that was my grandmother. I never knew her as that woman. So for her, as a young child, as a young teenager, to be able to pick up on the significance of hearing her grandmother's story, that really resonated. I think that that's just such a beautiful reminder why the importance of giving families, a younger generation, the opportunity to see their grandparents in a whole different light that perhaps they haven't been able to do for various reasons. So it's a really lovely story that I do share from time to time, and it's a very special one.
Yeah, that is special, because you're right. As when we're kids growing up, you never think of your parents or grandparents have ever been the age you are at that time, do you? So I totally get that.
It's a beautiful story, and once again, it's a reminder that we all have a story regardless of the least. And also, especially when it's not everyone's situation or family dynamic or whatever it may be is what we would want it to be. And I think it's also a reminder that a person's lifetime is their story. It's not just a short, the last few years, especially if that's been particularly challenging. If that loved one was, the whole story, not just focusing on perhaps the last few years, which may have been particularly traumatic or not ideal. So once again, it's just a reminder that we honour the whole life, the whole story, the good, maybe the not so good, and everything in between, because all being human and living.
It's our tapestry, isn't it?
It is our tapestry, and it's just something that I really find quite humbling, and a reminder, everyone deserves to have their story heard.
I really like that. Now, I just see that we're starting to run out of time here. So I'm conscientious of your time, Karen. So is there anything that you'd like to share with our listeners that perhaps I haven't asked?
Oh, goodness. Now you're putting me on the spot. Firstly, I think it's a really wonderful to be able to have this conversation with you, and people listening. If something resonates, then I think that's fantastic. And whatever that is, I mean, I hope they talk with their families or share that with someone that they love, or just have a conversation. I I think I have this saying, and I say it to my boys. So I've got 2 young adults, men, and grandchildren as well.
Mhm.
And I have this saying, and I say this completely respectfully, but we are all pending. We are not guaranteed a single day. And yes, there's a little bit of humour with that, but I mean no disrespect by saying that, but it's a reminder that how special life is. Like I say, I find it keeps me grounded, keeps it real, and it's nice. So have a conversation with people that you care about and love, and maybe if the situations or if there's things on your chest, write a letter, write it out. Just don't hold it in. You don't have
It's
to
a
do
really good
anything.
tip, actually. Yeah,
Just write
writing it down.
Yeah, you don't have to hang on to it. Just write it out and let it go.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I like that. That's brilliant. Oh, well, thank you so much for your time, Karen. We'll have to catch up again, but I'll definitely put in the notes where people can get hold of you as well if they would like to have a chat and discuss anything further that maybe resonates with them through this conversation.
Thank you.
You're welcome.